The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the speakers and panelists, and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ETHOS Institute for Public Christianity and its founding institutions and organizations.
But let me just give a brief summary of the reasons why there are good reasons and evidence to think that Jesus truly rose from the dead. In fact, many scientists and historians who have examined the historical evidence come to the conclusion that Jesus did indeed rose from the dead. And this includes Professor Francis Collins, who is an eminent scientist, the former head of the Human Genome Project, a world-leading scientist, and he was not a Christian before. He started life as an atheist, but he became a Christian, partly because, for various reasons. One is that he had because of the moral argument for the existence of God, and also because of the resurrection of Jesus, the historical evidence for his resurrection. Okay. Now, what are some of these evidence? Now, historians, whether Christians or non-Christians, almost all historians recognize that 1 Corinthians chapter 15 contained a very early tradition, which was written during the time when many eyewitnesses of Jesus were still around. Okay. This tradition indicates that many people claim to have seen the resurrected Jesus shortly after his crucifixion. Okay. So these people include the 12 apostles, and then the 500, and then other groups of apostles, and you also include people who did not initially believe in Jesus, such as James, right? And also Paul himself, right, who was also a non-Christian, right, initially. But they became Christians after they saw the resurrected Jesus. Now, there are only a few possibilities. In this article, which is published in 2009 by Oxford University Press, I demonstrated that there are only the following possibilities concerning these people who claim to have seen the resurrected Jesus. The first possibility is that, well, these people may have told a lie. Okay, so they claim that they saw Jesus, but they didn't actually see anything. Okay, so either they didn't see anything or they did see something. Okay, so if they did see something, then there's only two possibilities. Either what they think they saw is something that's inside their minds, maybe a hallucination or a dream. They dream about Jesus. Or is caused by something that's outside their mind. It's a real person that they saw. Now, if it's caused by a real person that they saw, then there's only two possibilities. Either this person was not Jesus, maybe they misidentified someone else as Jesus, okay? Or it was Jesus. Okay? So either it was not Jesus or it was Jesus. Okay? So if it was Jesus, then there's only two possibilities. Okay? So either this Jesus didn't die on the cross, maybe he ran away. Maybe he wasn't crucified. No? They crucified the wrong guy. And Jesus ran away. And 3 days later, he came out and said, hey, I'm alive. No? So they crucified. Either he ran away, either he wasn't crucified, or he was crucified, but he didn't die. No? So maybe he fainted on the cross. No? He just fainted on the cross, and then 3 days, and he was buried. And 3 days later, he climbed out from the tomb and said, hey, guys, I'm alive. Okay? So either he didn't die on the cross, or he did die on the cross. So if he did die on the cross, then the person whom they saw must be the Jesus who died on the cross and was alive again, right? Which means that they must have seen the resurrected Jesus. Okay. So we see there are only these few possibilities. Okay. Either all of them conspired to tell a lie, either all of them didn't see anything, or it was a hallucination, or it was a misidentification, or it was Jesus escaped, or he fainted on the cross, or he truly resurrected. There are only these few possibilities. Now, which is the most reasonable explanation? Now, is it reasonable to think that the earliest Christians, they conspired to tell a lie? They didn't actually see anything, but they claimed that they saw Jesus. Now, this is not reasonable. In fact, this hypothesis has been widely rejected by historians, including most non-Christian historians. They would reject this hypothesis. Why? For many reasons, one of which is that the earliest Christians had to pay a very high price for proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus. Right? They have to pay a price for their faith. In fact, the historical evidence indicates that many of them were martyred for their faith. Okay? Now, we know that many people will be willing to die for what they think is true, okay? Even though that might not be true. Okay? So, for example, we know of many terrorists, right, who are willing to blow themselves up, right, for their faith. Right? And the reason why they do that is because they think that their faith is true, even though it might not be true, okay? But they think that it's true. Okay? So this indicates that many people are willing to die for what they think is true. But it will be very difficult to find a large group of people who are willing to sacrifice everything and to die for what they know is false. You know what I'm saying? Okay, it will be very difficult to find a large group of people who are willing to die and to sacrifice everything for what they know is false. Okay? And to be willing to go to hell for it. Okay? Now, don't forget that these earliest Christians, they are devout Jews, I mentioned. Okay? So they evidently believe in Yahweh, right? And they know that if they preach a false Messiah, if they are a false witness, they will be punished, they'll be condemned, they'll be judged by the God of Israel. Okay? So given these circumstances, it will be unreasonable to think that they invented this lie and will be willing to sacrifice everything, and to die for this, and even to be willing to go to hell for proclaiming a false Messiah and his resurrection. And therefore, this must. Therefore, the apostles, they must have truly experienced something. Okay, it is not a lie. They must have truly experienced something which convinced them that Jesus resurrected, such that they would be courageously proclaim his resurrection in the face of their enemies and were willing to sacrifice everything for it. Okay. They must have experienced something that gives them the courage, right, to go out and proclaim to the world that Jesus is risen. Now, could it be a hallucination? Well, if it was just one or two persons who saw Jesus, then maybe. Right? But here we're talking about groups of people, right? The 12 apostles, the 500 people, and then another group of apostles, right? Now, if today I say to you that Andrew Loke isn't here today, and all of you are seeing a hallucination, okay, would you believe? Of course not, right? Because you can check with your neighbor. You can check with the person sitting next to you. Is there someone there who is talking to us right now? Okay. And you can easily find out that whether you are seeing a hallucination or not. Okay. So this is not reasonable to think that this is a hallucination. It must be a real person. Could it be mistaken identity? Well, not reasonable, because the disciples knew Jesus personally, right? They have lived with him, for a period of time, and if they did not identify carefully and make sure that this person is really Jesus, they would not have thought that he rose from the dead and be willing to give up everything to proclaim his resurrection. Could it be that Jesus escaped? Well, again, this is not reasonable, because the crucifixion was a public event, right, that was witnessed by many people. So it would be very unreasonable to think that the enemies of Jesus, the disciples of Jesus, and also members of the public, all of them failed to recognize that it was the wrong guy who was crucified. Right? Now, could it be that Jesus didn't die on the cross, that he just fainted on the cross? Now, again, this doesn't make sense. Firstly, the crucifixion was the most cruel form of torture in the ancient world. Okay? And the Roman way of flogging a criminal is incredibly gruesome, right? So the whip that they used, for example, will have these iron spikes, which will dug up a person's flesh and blood when the person is whipped. And the severe blood loss that result from the flogging for the crucifixion will have reduced the chance of survival to practically nil. In fact, Josephus records that some people would have died even from the flogging alone. Now, Jesus was not only flogged, but he was also crucified. And it's not reasonable to think that anybody could survive that. But secondly, even if Jesus survived the crucifixion, he would have been half dead. Right? He would have been severely injured. And we can imagine a severely injured Jesus, right, climbing out from the tomb and telling people, "Hey guys, I'm risen from the dead." Nobody will believe it. They will have sent him to the A&E hospital. This guy needs resuscitation. They will not fall down at his feet and say, "Hallelujah, you are our Lord and our God. No, they will not worship him as the Lord and creator of the universe. So again, this hypothesis does not explain satisfactorily why the earliest Christians would come to the conviction that Jesus was resurrected and that they would believe that Jesus was truly divine. And therefore, the only reasonable explanation that we have is the resurrection. Okay? We have no other explanation. And so, to summarize the case for the resurrection, the historical evidence indicate that the earliest Christians claimed to have witnessed the resurrected Jesus shortly after his crucifixion. They did not invent this claim, but they truly saw something. It was not a hallucination. It was a real person that they saw. And this person was not another person, it was Jesus. And this Jesus was the one who was crucified and was seen alive again. Okay? And therefore, the person that they saw is the resurrected Jesus. And therefore, Jesus resurrected. Hallelujah. Okay. So the resurrection gives us good reasons to believe in the claims of Jesus. Now, many skeptics have investigated the case for the resurrection, and they have come to the conclusion that Jesus was truly resurrected, and they have become Christians. One of them is this professor called Paul Williams, who is an eminent historian and philosopher of Buddhism. And for 20 over years, he was a Buddhist himself. But around 10 years ago, he changed his mind and became a Catholic Christian. And his friends were very surprised. Why do you change your faith? And the reasons he gave was the resurrection of Jesus. He had investigated the case for the resurrection and come to the conclusion that in his own words, as far as I can see, it is more rational to believe in the resurrection than in the alternative. I have thus chosen to believe, and my belief is based on reasons. Okay? I argue that it's a rationally based belief that for me make more sense than the other alternative explanations. Okay? So there are very good reasons to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Finally, let us consider Jesus' claim to be truly divine. Now, this is also very astonishing. As I mentioned earlier on, many atheists, like Richard Dawkins, would agree that Jesus was a great teacher, right? But they are not willing to acknowledge him as truly divine. However, great teachers like Gautama, Shakyamuni, Confucius, Aristotle, Socrates, these people did not claim to be truly divine, right? But Jesus did. So if Jesus was not divine, then who is he? Okay. If Jesus was not God, then who is he? Now, C.S. Lewis have thought about this before, and he claimed to the conclusion that Jesus must be God, and that's the reason why he believed that Jesus is God. C.S. Lewis was not a Christian initially, right? He was also an atheist. But here is the reason why he became a Christian. He says, I am trying here to prevent anyone saying really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, like Richard Dawkins, but I don't accept his claim to be God. This is the one thing we must not say C.S. Lewis. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of a man who said that he's a poached egg, utterly crazy, out of his mind, don't know what he's talking about. Okay? Or else he will be the devil of hell, a deceiver. Right? You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Now, it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend. And consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. Okay. So this is the most reasonable explanation who Jesus is. Now, how do non-Christians respond to these arguments? Now, Bart Ehrman, in his book, How Jesus Became God, right, in the first chapter of his book, he claimed that there are other people who are also like Jesus. So Jesus is not someone special. Okay. Ehrman cited the case of Apollonius of Tyana, who was a 3rd century Roman philosopher and was also claimed by someone else to be the Son of God and also could do miracles. And if you search the internet, you'll see some atheists, they would say that there are other people who are also like Jesus. Say, for example, the Egyptian god Osiris. He was also said to have died and resurrected. And some of you might know Sai Baba. Okay. His followers can be found in Singapore. And he also claimed to be God. And in fact, I have read his book, and he also claimed to be able to do the miracles that Jesus did. He made that claim as well. And then the last case, I think, is the most interesting. By the way, I discussed these cases in my book, The Origins of Divine Christology. I have no time to go through these and other cases because there's quite a lot of cases to consider, right? So I just chose a few examples, okay, and just talk very briefly about them. Now, I would like to mention this guy called Menachem Schneerson. Okay. Now, this is a really interesting guy. Why? Because he is a Jew, okay? And there are some Jews today who claim that he is God. Now, I mentioned previously that in the Jewish context, it is very difficult to come to the conclusion that any human being can be God. In fact, when we look at the history of Judaism, right, the history of the Jews, from the time of the Second Temple onwards until today, we can hardly find any Jew who claimed to be God and was widely believed by other Jews to be God. Okay. We can find many examples in other cultures, in those polytheistic and pantheistic cultures. In the polytheistic and pantheistic worldview, it's very easy to regard some heroes as gods, right? I mentioned this yesterday. But in the Jewish monotheistic culture, it's extremely difficult. In fact, there are hardly any other examples other than Jesus who was recognized by other Jews to be God. Okay. Now, the only possible counterexample is this case. The only reasonable counterexample that someone might suggest is this case, this guy, Menachem Schneerson. Okay. Now, he was a Jewish rabbi who died not too long ago in 1994, and he was claimed by some Jews to be God. Okay. So I think this is the best counterexample that people can give, and there are only this example. Now, when we look at the history of Judaism, I need to mention something else, which is that around the time of Jesus, there were also other people who claimed to be the Messiah. Okay? There are some messianic claimants. People like Theodas, whom you read in Acts chapter 6. He claimed to be somebody, and he was killed. Right? So that guy claimed to be the Messiah. And there's also this guy called Simon Bar Kokhba, and this person called Judas Maccabeus. So there are some Jews around the time of Jesus who claim to be the Messiah. But we must note that these people are not regarded by their followers as God. Okay? They were only regarded as human agents of God. Okay? So they are regarded as Messiah, but not God. Okay? But Jesus was not only regarded as Messiah, he was also regarded as God by the earliest Christians. And that is what makes it so significantly different from the other messianic figures. And the other thing we need to take note is that for those other messianic figures, people like Theodas, Simon Bar Kokhba, their followers only followed them for a while. But once they were killed, once they died, they stopped following him. The movement stopped. Because for the Jews, it's quite unthinkable that someone can be the Messiah and yet still die. Whereas the case of Jesus is different again. Jesus was crucified on the cross. Right? He suffered the most humiliating death on the cross. And yet, afterwards, his disciples, they continued to follow him and even worship him as God. Okay? So you don't find any analogies to this in the Jewish history, except perhaps this case, Schneerson, which I will talk about in my next slide. Okay? So I will argue that all these suggested parallels are real parallels. they suffer from one or more of the following defects. Okay, first point is some of them are not even real historical persons. So for example, Osiris, the Egyptian god, right? This is pure legend. There's no historical evidence, no eyewitness of his existence. This is a legendary figure. And others are found in the polytheistic, pantheistic context. So for example, Apollonius, right? He is from the Roman pagan context. And Sai Baba, he is also from a pantheistic context. As I mentioned earlier on, in those contexts, it's very easy to worship human beings as God. Those people don't have to be perfect in order to be worshipped as God, okay? Which is different from Jesus, the case of Jesus. Because in the Jewish monotheistic context, you have to be perfect, right? You have to show yourself to be powerful and able to overcome death, in order that you can be recognized as God. In order that your disciples will come to a widespread agreement that you are God. Okay? And in some other cases, the stories likely copied from Jesus. So for example, Apollonius, this happened in the 3rd century, and historians think that it's likely that the people who wrote this story actually copied from Jesus, to try to suggest a counter-Jesus figure. So they maybe copied some stories from there. And also, in the case of Sneerson, that is what probably happened as well. Some of the claims that is made about him might have also been copied from the Gospels, even though his followers deny that. But there are some striking similarities. And very importantly, in the case of Sneerson, the majority of his close supporters do not actually believe that he is God. Okay. I mentioned earlier on that there is a small group of Jews, right, who claim that he is God. But those are the tiny minority among his followers, and in fact, those tiny minority are not even his closest followers. Now, after Sneerson died, something very interesting happened. Right? I mentioned that there's this small group of people who claim that he's God. But his closest followers issued a statement in 1998. You can read this online, actually. And this statement provides an illuminating confirmation of my considerations, of my 14 considerations, which I listed earlier on. In this statement, the highest ranked members of the Shabbat movement, which Sneerson belongs to, his closest followers condemn the deification of any human being, okay, as contrary to the core and foundation of the Jewish faith. Okay. And they mention that the preoccupation with identifying Sneerson as Messiah is clearly contrary to his own wishes. Okay. So we see that his closest followers defended Sneerson himself against the falsification of his identity. Because Sneerson himself never claimed to be God, actually. He did not dare meet the claim. And his followers say that, hey guys, even he himself doesn't claim to be God. So why are you crazy people worshipping him, saying that he's Messiah and saying that he's God? It's crazy. And so we see that his closest followers denounce this claim. And this is opposite to the case of Jesus, right? If you recognize, right? In the case of Jesus, we see that Jesus' closest followers, the 12 disciples, the leaders of the earliest Christianity, the 12, Paul, they were in widespread agreement that he is divine. And there were many people who claimed to have seen Jesus alive and resurrected. Whereas in the case of this Sneerson, there is no such evidence for thinking that he truly resurrected from the dead. In fact, his closest followers will still go to his tomb year after year to pay respects. Okay, so his body is still here. There are some crazy fellows who claim that he resurrected, but this is not seen by a group of witnesses. There's just one or two guys saying that, I dream about him, that kind of thing. But there's no witness, there's no group of witnesses saying that, 500 people or 12 disciples saying that, I saw Sneerson alive. There's no such evidence. In fact, his body is still buried in the States today, in America today. Okay. So in none of these cases, okay, not Sneerson, not Apollonius, in none of these cases do we see evidence that someone could do all the 5 things that I listed. Okay. We don't see, none of them could show that they could overcome death. Okay. None of them can prove that. And maybe one or two of them there are some miraculous claims, and maybe some of them could give some morally insightful teachings, but none of them can do all these 5 things together. Okay? So it is these 5 things taken together, that give us very good reasons to believe that Jesus is truly divine, able to do miracles, give morally insightful teachings, live a perfect life, overcome death, and claim the divine. Right? Maybe there are a few people who can do one or two of these things, but not all these five together. And it's clearly not raised from the dead. Right? Only Jesus did that. Now, somebody might raise the following objection. Okay, if Jesus is really so powerful, if there's such good reasons to think that he's God, why didn't the whole nation of Israel convert? Okay. This is a common objection. And so let me reply to it. Now, I think this question, I think this can be easily explained by other reasons. Now, we know that in the first century, many Jews were hoping for a Messiah who would deliver them from the Romans and set up a powerful Israel nation. Now, Jesus did not fulfill this dream, but he was crucified by the Romans. So this would have been very difficult for the Jews to believe. And that's why it's very easy to explain why many Jews refuse to believe in Jesus. Because Jesus did not fulfill their dream. Jesus did not deliver them from the Romans. Okay. It's just like today, many people don't believe in God, not because there's no good reason to believe in God, but because God did not meet their expectations, right? So some people, they don't believe in God because of their disappointments, because of their emotional hurts, because of their suffering. And many people don't believe in God because God did not do what they want him to do. Okay? And this can easily explain why many Jews still refuse to believe in God. And we also realize from the historical sources that many Jewish leaders were jealous of Jesus. Okay? Because Jesus was quite popular during that time, and people were following him, and the leaders were afraid that they were losing their authority. Right? People are going after him, right? So they were jealous. And that's why they conspired to crucify him. And after his crucifixion, many Jews would have been afraid to follow Jesus because they will be afraid of the authorities and also ostracization from families. Okay. Now, if they will know what it means to follow Jesus and to carry the cross and follow Jesus, right? Because Jesus himself was crucified. So if you also want to believe in Jesus, you must also be prepared to be crucified as well. Okay. And not many people will be willing to do that. So for these and various other reasons, it's very easy to explain why many Jews would not want to believe in Jesus. And here we need to pay attention to this distinction, which is highlighted by the atheist philosopher Anthony Flew. Flew mentions the distinction between producing a proof and persuading a person. These are two different things, okay? A person can be persuaded by an abominable argument and remain unconvinced by one that ought to be accepted. Okay. So, we know today that many people are deceived by many bad arguments. Right? We also know that many people today are very stubborn. Right? They refuse to believe in a good argument. Okay. So, whether everybody believes or whether everybody don't believe, that is not the most important indicator of whether the claim is true or not. Okay? Because people have different reasons for why they believe or not to believe. Okay? But when it comes to the truth of the matter, what really matters is not whether everybody are persuaded or not, okay? As Flew noted. Okay? But rather, what really matters is the quality of the arguments and the quality and whether they are good evidence. Okay? And it remains the case that the evidence for Jesus' resurrection and his claim to be divine requires an explanation. If Jesus is not God, then who is he? And I've argued that the best explanation is that Jesus truly rose from the dead and he is God. Now let me talk about one final objection from Bart Ehrman. Okay? So Ehrman asked this question: how can Christ be God and God the Father be God if there's only one God? Okay. So we can see here that Ehrman is quite confused about the doctrine of the Trinity. Right? It doesn't make sense to him. Okay, he was confused. Okay? How can Christ be God and God the Father is God when there's only one God? Okay? Now, many people have this question. Okay, when we say Jesus is God, do we mean that Jesus equals God the Father? Okay, right? So this will be confused. Now, the answer is no. And the reason why is because, first of all, we need to note that the word is has more than one meaning. Okay? It can mean equal to, but it can also mean predication. So, for example, when we say the rose is red, okay, the rose is red, we don't say the rose equals to red. Rather, what we mean is that the rose has the property of being red in color. It's a property. Okay? So likewise, when we say that Jesus is God, we do not mean that Jesus equals the one being of God. If that's the case, then this will mean Jesus equal the Father, equal the whole, or this will exclude God the Father from the being of God. Rather, what we mean when we say Jesus is God is that Jesus is a person who has the property of being truly divine. Jesus is a truly divine person. He is uncreated, he is eternal, he is the creator, he is perfect, he is all-powerful, etc. Okay? And therefore, in reply to Ehrman, how can Jesus be God and Father be God and there's only one God? The answer is that there is only one being of God. Okay? God is one being. There's only one God. But within this one God, there are three persons: God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. Okay? And when we say Jesus is God, we don't mean that Jesus equals the Father, but rather what it means is that Jesus is one of the persons of the Trinity who has the property of being truly divine. He's uncreated, he's eternal, he's all-powerful, etc. So, in conclusion, there are good reasons to believe that Jesus is God. Jesus claimed to be truly divine, and he did miracles, gave morally insightful teachings, lived a perfect life, and overcome death to show that he is truly divine. And so the question for all of us tonight is he your Lord and your God? May we all say to him, as Thomas did, my God and my Lord, and experience, as Paul did, the surpassing value of knowing Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.